We all know that one teacher who gives everything to their students, but what happens when that same teacher needs our help? Hi everyone, welcome to Life Flow, where every story brings a new perspective. Let's get started. The sun had just risen as Mr. Mateo, a teacher in his early 40s, walked toward the small-town high school where he taught. He was known throughout the school for being one of the most dedicated and passionate teachers. His students admired him greatly, not just because of how engaging his classes were, but also for the genuine care he showed for each and every one of them. What they didn't know, however, was that beneath his usual friendly smile, Mr. Mateo was carrying a burden heavier than any of them could imagine. A few months earlier, his wife, Elena, had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. It was the kind of news that shakes your entire world to the core. The doctors had told them that, while the cancer was treatable, the medication and procedures were incredibly expensive, and their insurance wouldn't cover most of it. Despite the crushing news, Mateo never brought his personal troubles into the classroom. He wanted his students to focus on their education, not on his struggles. Every morning, Mr. Mateo continued to show up at school, greeting his students with his usual energy and enthusiasm. His lessons were captivating, always finding new ways to make even the most difficult subjects understandable and interesting. To his students, he was the best teacher they'd ever had. But after school, when the bell rang and the classrooms emptied, Mr. Mateo's day wasn't over. He would head straight to his second job at a local convenience store, working the late shift to help cover the medical bills piling up. One afternoon, one of his students, Alex, had stopped by the convenience store to pick up a snack. He was surprised to see his teacher, usually so full of life, looking worn out and exhausted as he stocked shelves. Alex didn't mention it to Mr. Mateo at the time, but the sight of his teacher working another job stuck with him. Why would someone as incredible as Mr. Mateo, who already worked so hard at school, need to take on extra shifts? Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, Alex mentioned what he saw to his friend Lucas, another student in Mr. Mateo's class. As it turned out, Lucas's father was a doctor, and not just any doctor. He was the one treating Mr. Mateo's wife. Over dinner that evening, Lucas's father had shared how much admiration he had for Mr. Mateo, describing how the teacher was doing everything he could to support his wife's treatment. However, Lucas's father also revealed the heartbreaking reality. The insurance wouldn't cover the rare treatment Elena needed, and it was draining the family's savings. If they didn't find a way to continue the treatment, Elena's chances of recovery would fade. Lucas couldn't believe it. How could Mr. Mateo, the man who had given so much to his students, be going through something so devastating and not tell anyone? After hearing this, he immediately called Alex. The two decided they couldn't sit by and do nothing. They knew Mr. Mateo would never ask for help, but that didn't mean they couldn't try to help him on their own. The next day at school, Alex and Lucas gathered a few of their close friends, other students who adored Mr. Mateo, and shared what they had learned. Everyone was shocked and saddened by the news, but more than that, they were determined to do something about it. They brainstormed ideas, thinking of ways they could raise money to help cover the costs of Elena's treatment. The students knew it wouldn't be easy, but Mr. Mateo had always gone above and beyond for them, and now was their turn to give back. A few days later, they had a plan. They decided to organize a fundraising event in the town, complete with bake sales, car washes, and even a talent show. They also set up an online crowdfunding page where anyone who knew Mr. Mateo, or just wanted to support a good cause, could donate. Word spread quickly among the students, and soon the whole school was buzzing with excitement. Everyone wanted to pitch in and help. However, not everything went smoothly. As the students worked tirelessly on their plans, the school administration caught wind of what was happening. Mr. Johnson, the principal, wasn't pleased. He called Alex and Lucas into his office, where he told them that the school couldn't officially support the fundraiser. "We have policies in place," Mr. Johnson explained, "and it's not appropriate for students to get involved in a teacher's personal life, no matter how well-intentioned." Alex and Lucas were crushed. They had hoped the school would back them, but instead, they were being told to stop. Mr. Johnson warned them that any fundraising activity would have to take place off school grounds, and he made it clear that the administration wouldn't be involved. Despite the setback, Alex, Lucas, and the other students refused to give up. They decided to move forward with their plans outside of school, knowing that this was bigger than any policy. The students continued to organize the event, spreading the word throughout the town. Local businesses offered to donate prizes for raffles, parents baked goods for the bake sale, and even a few former students who had once been taught by Mr. Mateo joined in to help. The community came together, driven by a shared desire to support the teacher who had made such an impact on so many lives. Meanwhile, Mr. Mateo remained unaware of the students' efforts. He had noticed that his students were acting a little differently in class, whispering to each other more than usual and glancing his way with concerned looks. But he dismissed it, thinking they were simply preparing for finals or working on some group project. He had no idea they were planning something that would change his life. As the weeks passed, the strain of trying to keep up with the medical bills began to take its toll on Mr. Mateo. His wife's treatment was expensive, and their savings were running dangerously low. There were nights when he came home from the convenience store, utterly exhausted, and would collapse in a bed, wondering how much longer they could hold on. He didn't want to show his pain at school, but it was getting harder and harder to put on a brave face. His cheerful demeanor was starting to crack. One particularly difficult morning, Mr. Mateo arrived at school feeling defeated. He hadn't slept well, and the worry about his wife's condition had kept him up most of the night. His mind was racing with thoughts of how they were going to make it through the next round of treatment, and for the first time, he found it hard to focus on teaching. His students noticed immediately that something was wrong. As he stood at the front of the classroom, trying to gather his thoughts for the lesson, one of his students raised their hand. "Mr. Mateo, are you okay?" they asked, concern evident in their voice. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Should he tell them the truth? Should he let them in on the struggles he had been keeping to himself for so long? Just as Mr. Mateo was about to speak, the door to the classroom swung open. Standing there, with beaming smiles on their faces, were Alex, Lucas, and the rest of the students who had been working so hard behind the scenes. In their hands, they held a large envelope, decorated with the signatures of everyone in the town who had contributed to the fundraiser. Mr. Mateo looked at them, confused, as the students walked toward him. "Mr. Mateo," Alex began, his voice steady but emotional, "you've always been there for us, and now it's our turn to be there for you." Mr. Mateo's eyes widened in disbelief as Lucas continued. "We know about your wife, and we know what you've been going through. We raised this money to help cover the treatment costs. You're the best teacher we've ever had, and we want to make sure you and your family are okay." Tears welled up in Mr. Mateo's eyes as he opened the envelope, revealing thousands of dollars in donations from students, parents, and community members. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He was overwhelmed by the kindness and generosity of his students and the people in the town. Just when he had been on the verge of losing hope, they had given him and his wife a lifeline. The room fell into a heavy silence as Mr. Johnson, the principal, stormed back into the classroom, his face flushed with anger. His rigid adherence to school policy had never wavered, and today, in his eyes, a serious line had been crossed. "Mr. Mateo," Mr. Johnson said in a stern voice that echoed through the room, "you are hereby suspended with immediate effect until further notice. There will be a formal meeting with the school board and parents to address this issue." The words hit like a punch to the gut, both for Mr. Mateo and the students. Suspended? For what? For the kindness his students had shown? The disbelief on everyone's faces was clear, but Mr. Johnson was unwavering. He didn't care about the good intentions behind the fundraiser. All he saw was a breach of the rules. The school had policies against personal involvement between staff and students, and he was determined to enforce them. "I'm sorry, but rules are rules," Mr. Johnson added, his voice colder than ever. "We can't have this kind of personal fundraising happening under school supervision. The parents' board will decide the next steps." Mr. Mateo stood in shock, unable to find the words. The students, who had poured their hearts into helping him, stared at Mr. Johnson, devastated by the outcome. As Mr. Mateo quietly gathered his things, he could feel the weight of disappointment pressing down on him. It wasn't just the suspension, it was the fact that the administration couldn't see the bigger picture. The next few days were a whirlwind of uncertainty. News of the suspension spread quickly throughout the town, and the upcoming parent-teacher meeting became the most anticipated event in years. Students, parents, and even ex-students all rallied behind Mr. Mateo. The community, who knew the impact Mr. Mateo had on so many lives, began organizing in support of their beloved teacher. It wasn't just about raising funds anymore, it was about standing up for what they believed was right. The day of the meeting arrived, and the school gymnasium was filled beyond capacity. Parents, students, ex-students, and even town members who had heard about the situation gathered to express their support. The air buzzed with anticipation as everyone waited for the meeting to begin. Mr. Mateo, despite his suspension, sat quietly at the front, unsure of what the outcome would be. Mr. Johnson, standing at the podium, looked out at the crowd. He hadn't expected such a massive turnout. His usually rigid expression showed signs of strain. As the meeting started, parents began to speak, one after another, sharing stories of how Mr. Mateo had impacted their children's lives, not just academically, but personally. The students shared how he had always been there for them, offering guidance and kindness without ever asking for anything in return. "I don't think any of us knew how much he was going through," said Lucas's father, the doctor who had treated Mr. Mateo's wife. "But that didn't stop him from coming to school every day and giving his best. He's the kind of teacher who goes above and beyond, and that's why we're all here, to support him." As more and more people spoke, Mr. Johnson began to feel the weight of his decision pressing on him. He had always been a stickler for the rules, believing that structure and order were the backbone of any successful institution. But now, standing before a crowd that was united in their defense of a good man, he realized something important. Some situations go beyond the rules. Sometimes, compassion and community must come first. After what felt like hours of testimony, Mr. Johnson finally stood up and faced the room. "I've heard everything you've said today," he began, his voice steady but softer than usual. "And I want to start by admitting that I made a mistake. I've always believed in the importance of rules, but I see now that there are moments when we need to step back and understand the bigger picture. Mr. Mateo's suspension is hereby lifted, effective immediately." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, followed by applause. But Mr. Johnson wasn't finished. "I want to apologize to Mr. Mateo," he continued, turning to face the teacher directly. "Not just for the suspension, but for not recognizing sooner the positive impact you've had on this school and this community. You've inspired your students and, through your example, reminded all of us what it means to truly care for others. I'd like to be part of that going forward." The gym erupted in applause again, but this time it wasn't just for the reinstatement. It was for the unity they all felt in that moment. Mr. Mateo, overwhelmed with gratitude, stood to address the crowd. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I never expected any of this. You've all done so much more than I could ever ask for. My wife and I are incredibly grateful. I don't have words to express what this means to us." The energy in the room was electric, but the story didn't end there. Following the meeting, Mr. Johnson, eager to make amends, became a key supporter of the fundraising efforts. He took an active role in every campaign organized by the students and the town, whether it was washing cars, running the bake sales, or even volunteering at the dunk tank fundraiser, where he was dunked into water more times than he could count. Mr. Johnson proved he was willing to go the extra mile to support the cause. The students, though still slightly in awe of seeing their once strict principal laughing and joking with them, appreciated his efforts. It was clear that his change of heart was genuine. For Mr. Mateo, the kindness and generosity of the town were nothing short of overwhelming. The fundraising efforts exceeded everyone's expectations, and they raised more than enough to cover his wife Elena's treatments. The outpouring of support not only saved his wife's life, but it also reinforced something Mr. Mateo had always believed: that kindness, even in the face of adversity, was the most powerful force. But despite the financial help, Mr. Mateo continued working the late shift at the convenience store. It wasn't because he needed the money anymore, but because he believed there were others in need, families struggling, just like his had been. He quietly donated part of the money he earned to other local families facing tough times, not seeking recognition, just wanting to pass on the kindness he had received. Months passed, and the once grim outlook on Elena's health began to improve. The doctors were amazed by her progress, and by the end of the year, she was declared cancer-free. The day she was able to return home, healthy and smiling, was one of the happiest moments of Mr. Mateo's life. The following school year, Mr. Mateo returned to his classroom, but things were different now. He wasn't just a teacher to his students. He was a symbol of resilience, kindness, and community. And while the challenges of life still existed, Mr. Mateo knew that, no matter what, he and his family wouldn't face them alone. Mr. Johnson, too, had changed. The once stern principal had learned that sometimes it was okay to bend the rules when it meant standing up for what was right. He continued to support the students in their various charitable efforts, often volunteering his time in ways that the old Mr. Johnson never would have. He and Mr. Mateo developed a newfound respect for each other, and their relationship became one of mutual admiration. As for the students, the bond they shared with Mr. Mateo only grew stronger. They saw firsthand the difference that compassion and collective action could make, and they carried those lessons with them, long after they left his classroom. In the end, Mr. Mateo's story wasn't just about one man's struggle. It was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of community, and the importance of standing up for one another, even when it's difficult. The town had rallied behind their teacher in his time of need, and in doing so, they had not only saved a life, but had also reminded themselves of the value of empathy and support. And as for Mr. Mateo and Elena, their story became one of hope, one that they shared with others, inspiring countless acts of kindness in return. If this story moved you, share this video and help spread the power of empathy and solidarity. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of those who need it most. Subscribe for more inspiring stories.